I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm...
Hello, my friends. Today we're going to take a look at some of the specific functions of Congress, specifically the House of Representation and the Senate, and we'll talk a little bit in this lecture about checks and balances and, I guess, separation of powers and some of the Constitution delegated power that Congress possesses. And maybe we'll throw some historical events at you to kind of illustrate these ideas. Number one, and some of this is repeat from other lectures, but I think that's probably a good thing to see it in a larger context. We absolutely need the Great Compromise. That's really where we start if we're going to talk about Congress, because that's really where Congress is set up. And you want to make sure that you have a handle on the Connecticut Compromise, which is also called the Great Compromise. This is where two states proposed their plan for how we were going to represent the states in the new country after the horrific experience of the Articles of Confederation. And we had the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan. The Virginia plan is seen as the large state plan. And basically, because they're a very populated state, they wanted a Congress that was based on population, therefore giving them more weight, more voice in this room of children in the states. Because remember, the idea in federalism is that the states are represented in the national government, the people are represented through the states in the national government in some type of House or Congress or whatever. Under the Articles, remember, there was only a one-house Congress. Every state had equal representation, one vote per state, and they couldn't get anything done. So Virginia wants it based on population. They want lots of representation. They don't think a state like New Jersey, which has not as many people, deserves the same amount of power in this new government. New Jersey, on the other hand, sees kind of states as sovereign entities, as equal co-partners with other states in the national government. So they want it basically based on equality, that every state should get the same amount of representation. And there were other aspects of the plans in terms of how they were going to elect the president. But really, we want to focus on the magic word. And the magic word, when we're talking about Congress, is representation. Representation is the key to the compromise, the Great Compromise, or the Connecticut Compromise. So what is the compromise? The compromise is very simple. We're going to take aspects of both plans, the small state plan based on equality and the large state plan based on population, and we're going to bring them together to build a two-house Congress. The two-house Congress is composed of the House of Representation, and this is basically the bone for the large states. The House of Representation is based on population. This is also parallel to the Electoral College, because that's how you get your electoral number. You take the amount of people you have in your state, and they have a formula where they divide, and they end up with a number based on that state's population. So if you look at a state like California, I'm going to mess up the electoral numbers, but I believe they have 54, which means they have 52 congressmen, congresswomen that represent Cali Baby in the House of Representation. And when you add the other side of that plan, the Senate number, which is 2 per state, we'll go over that again in more detail, not that there's much detail, you get 54. So again, the Great Compromise, the Connecticut Compromise, the bone for the House is that it will be based on population. And every 10 years, they even mandated that we count people. That's the census. And really, the primary purpose is to figure out the magic word for that state. What's the magic word? Let me hear you say it. Yeah, good for you. Representation. Now, on the other side of the coin, we can't have states like New Jersey in the corner pouting and all mad because they're not feeling protected and represented in this new government. So we're going to give them a bone too. And their bone is going to be the Senate. And the Senate, every state gets 2 senators. It don't matter how big or small you are, how many people you have living. Alaska gets 2. Watch this. Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Church. That's a song from kindergarten. Nevertheless, let's move on. So let's look at some specific functions of the House and the Senate, because that's really important too. And we'll talk some about written power, written, delegated, constitutional language, and a little bit of some unwritten. So let's look at the House first. In class, I've been referring to the House all year as the mad dogs, grrr. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one, there's a lot of them. They're a little unruly. They're a little more likely to kind of yell, out of turn, maybe to jump line, to be a little bit more crazy, because there are 435 House members. So they're a little more raucousy. So Mad Dogs kind of describes that concept. But even better is when you think of a mad dog, a crazy dog that likes to bite, you think of sharp teeth. The sharp teeth represent some delegated power, some specific language that the House has in the Constitution about. That didn't make sense. Nevertheless, the teeth represent, number one, that they're the ones in the process of removing a president impeach the president. I always think of this as kind of like biting the president, right? Kind of like stopping him in his tracks, arresting the president. You don't go to jail forever when you're arrested, you go to trial. But the biting, the arresting, the indictment, the I think you did something bad, is a House power. So the teeth represent impeachment. And again, remember, 2 presidents have been impeached, 0 have been removed. So impeachment does not mean removal. We're going to move to the Senate to do the trial. But it's a simple majority to impeach. The Senate's a little bit different. We're not just going to throw a president out because 51% of Congress doesn't like, something that they've done that they see as a high crime and misdemeanor. The teeth also represent the idea that House is supposed to start revenue bills, basically taxing power. This doesn't mean the Senate doesn't tax. All it means is the House begins the process. And there's a reason for this. In the Constitution, House members are the only direct example of democracy. This goes to again, back to the mad dog. I want to stick with the analogy so the analogy works on multiple, questions. Mad dogs need to be kept on a leash because they're mad dogs. So the leash represents direct democracy, because guess who's holding the other side of the leash? You, the people. The leash is a short leash. You can't have a mad dog on a 50-foot leash. It's going to bite somebody. It's on like a 3-foot leash, 5-foot leash. This represents the amount of their years for a term. 2-year terms. I mean, it's really crazy when you think about it. All the time and money and effort it takes to run a congressional campaign. And as soon as you're elected, you're like, oh, gotta run again. So they're constantly up for re-election. Back to the teeth. This is why. Because they have that all-important taxing power. And they have to be really considerate when they use it, because every 2 years they have to go back to their districts, back to the people they represent and say, by the way, I raised your taxes, elect me. This direct democracy is supposed to make them kind of conscious of the idea that they hold an enormous power, the power to tax. Now, the Senate, I think that's pretty much it we need for the mad dogs. I don't want to go into the Speaker of the House and the committee systems, and there might pop up a question about that, but we really don't have time to do that. We just want to make sure we know the House is based on population. Every 10 years they determine this by a census. This pretty much makes up their electoral number, which is used to elect the president. They have sharp teeth to tax, sharp teeth to specifically impeach the president. And they also have the leash idea, 2-year terms, direct democracy. So we only have 2 minutes to go over the Senate, so we better get on to it. I call the Senate in the class the bow ties. And that's because theme-wise, they're more of a formal institution. There's rules, and when you talk and when you sit down. The Senate has specific power in the Constitution. They, number one, have the power to remove the president, the trial, which is led by the Chief Justice, but it's the Senate that votes on removal of a president. And it's a supermajority. It's not just 51 out of 100. Otherwise, every president would be looking after, at their back. I believe Bill Clinton only had 20 or 30 impeachment votes out of 100. So I think they need 67. I shouldn't say think as a teacher, but that's absolutely a hard thing to do. We also want to make sure that we understand that the Senate serves 6-year terms. That's a much longer time to be deliberate and not really worry about what the people think, but what maybe is best for the nation. They used to be chosen by their state legislatures, but during the Gilded Age, when we saw there was a lot of corruption and a lot of greed, we're eventually in the 20th century going to pass the 17th Amendment, which I see as the dog leash kind of for the Senate, direct democracy. Now we choose our own senators. You must know the Senate checks the president. That's kind of the biggest question you're going to get most often or not. Number one, when when the president signs a treaty, the Senate has to ratify that treaty. So if the Senate's like, hey, Lucifer, king of all evil, I want to be friends. The Senate's like, no way. The Treaty of Versailles is a great example of that. I'm running out of time. Really quick, the Senate also ratifies cabinet picks and judges from the Supreme Court that the president picks. And I know that I'm forgetting stuff, and that is just terrible. But that's basically the concept of Congress, the House of Representation, and the Senate. And I think that I have to go. Filibuster, unwritten Constitution.